Okay, I'll do the dedication. All right, so we'll say good morning. Today's daf is Yud Zayin. We are picking up on Tes Zayin Amud Beis by the two dots Ein Bonin, which is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13 lines off from the bottom. Beautiful Gemara today. Our shir this morning, our shir this week, is dedicated by Eyal and Sarah Steinberg as a zechus for Refuah Shlema for Bas Susha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, she will have a complete and enduring refuah together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. So let's begin. Ein Bonin. So remember again the Mishnah that we learned a little while ago discussed all the things that one is not permitted to go ahead and build together. So along with that the Mishnah says, the Gemara says, so one of the things that you're not allowed to build is a basila. Basilkos. So the Gemara says over here, Rabbi Chana says in the there are three different types of basilkos. Shamalchei ovdei kochavim. There is the basila of the king, like where the king lives, the king's palace. Vishal merchatzos, the basila of the bathhouse. Vishal otzros, and the basila of ultimately the storehouse of the king. Rashi points out that's where he kept his treasure. So Rava says, Beis leheter ve'echad le'iser. Two of them you're allowed to build, one of them is prohibited. And the Gemara says, V'simen, how do you know which one is prohibited? Ve'le'esar malcheihem bezikim. So we'll say it's the basila ultimately again that the king lives in. That is the basila ultimately again that is aser. V'ikad others say, Amar Rava said, Kulam leheter. Ultimately again you could build all of the basilas. Is that true? Hatnan ein bonin imoin basilki gardum itztio bima. So we'll say in the Mishnah that you can't build with the akum, the basilki, the gardum, I will say, which represent also like a tiered courthouse. The itztadia, which also was another type of tower that was used for judgment, and the bima. Ema shel gardum v'shal itztadia v'shal bima. Rather say what it means is you can't build the basila of these particular structures. Taner Rabbanim. So we have an incredible story here. We'll say Tes Zayin with days 6 up from the bottom. Taner Rabbanim. Kishnit bas Rabbi Lazar leminos. Rabbi Lazar one time was seized by the Romans, leminos. Rabbi say minos means that he was seized by the heretics. He was seized by the Ovdei Kochavim to force him to worship idolatry. What happened? Hello, Lagardum. Lidom, they brought him up to the court to judge him. Amarla, O son Hegmon, Zakin Shakamoscha Yasok Bidvarim Betelim. So they gave him Musar. An old man like you should engage in such silliness. Now the silliness, of course, that they're referring to is Torah. How can you be so old and supposedly so wise, yet so foolish to engage in this thing that they call Torah? So Amarlo, Ne'eman Alai Hadayan. So what does Rabbi say? The judge, I know the judge will do good by me. I know the judge ultimately, again, has ne'emonos, ultimately to do the right thing. Rabbi Lazar, of course, is referring to Baruch Hu. So what happened? The before thought that Rabbi Lazar was talking about him. So meaning, the judge thought that Rabbi Lazar was flattering him, saying, you know what, I believe you're a wise man, I believe you'll do the just thing. But of course that was not the case. Instead, Rabbi Lazar was referring to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What happens? V'hula amar ela keneged alav shebashamayim amar lo hoyel ve'emanti alecha dimos pater. So a little flattery goes a long way. So what happens? So the judge says, well, since you have such faith in me, I swear by my God, Dimus, who was the idolatry, that I found you innocent, right? I've not found you innocent, but what's the word? Acquitted. I dismissed it. I've dismissed the case against you. I have dismissed the case, and therefore Rabbi Lazar goes free. So we'll say, listen to this. It's very profound. When Rabbi Lazar came home, so his students came to console him. Now, why does he require consolation, Rabbi say? See, everything ties back to our Gana Emunah, because Rabbi Lazar understands that these circumstances happened, there was a reason. See, he's trying to do a cheshbon hanefesh. Why is it that I was arrested in the first place? And by extension, why I said something that was interpreted ultimately again as what? As a statement of my submission to Avoda Zara. Meaning at the end of the day, I was talking about God, that Naaman Adayin Alai, that the great judge Kadosh Baruch Hu was Naaman, but yet it was interpreted as referring to this idolatrous judge. What is it that maybe I did that landed me in these circumstances? So what happens? So but no matter what anyone said, Rabbi Lazar would not be consoled. Akiva, Rebbe, Tershini lomar davar echa mimashilu maratani. So Rabbi Akiva goes out to Rabbi Elazar as Rebbe and he says, Rebbe, do you mind, can I say something? Can I offer a suggestion based on something you taught us? Amar lo, Amar lo. I said, Amar lo, Amar. And Rabbi Elazar says, yes, please say. Amar lo. So Rabbi Akiva said, Rebbe, Shema minus bal yodecha, top of Yod Zayin and Medalach will say, V'hana acha la v'nispasta. Rebbe, maybe one time someone said something heretical to you. Maybe one time someone said something that was religiously, Judaically inappropriate, and you agreed with it, or you derived benefit from that teaching. Is it possible that sometimes someone said something that was, again, minos, that was apicursus, and you believed it, or you accepted it, and perhaps va'alav nispasta, maybe that's why you were taken captive. Now that's why you were arrested, and ultimately said a statement which could be interpreted as your agreement. Avoda Zara, Amar Akiva, his kartani. Akiva, you're right. You just reminded me of something. Pamachos, the second line in Yizayim Udalf. Pamachos hayisi mahalik b'shoka elyon shet Sipori. One time I was walking in the upper marketplace in Sipori. Umasi echad, and I ran into a guy. V'Yakov ish kfar Sachino shmo, and his name was Yaakov from the village of Sachino. Amar li, so Yaakov. So we'll say, now Yaakov could have been a descriptive name. Yaakov lav dafka, that this individual was Jewish. So what happens? Amar li, so Yaakov said to me, Kasuv b'saraschem lo savi esnan zona. It says in your Torah that you are not allowed to bring a harlot's payment as an offering for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What does that mean? That let's say again, a harlot receives as her payment the sheep. You can't bring that sheep the carbon. So listen to the following case. What happens in the following case? Let's say a harlot was paid in building materials. And what happens? Can we take those building materials and use them to construct a bathroom for the Kohen Gadol? Now, why does the Kohen Gadol need his own bathroom? So Rashi points out the Mishnah in Maseches Yuma, first Mishnah, that ultimately, again, what happens after Rosh Hashanah? They go out and they sequester the Kohen Gadol for the days leading up to Yom Kippur, in an effort to prepare him for the Avoda. So we'll say, so he had his own room, he had his own, Rashi points out over here, he had Lishkas Parhedron, he had his own room, and they had for him a lavatory, a bathroom there. So can you take the Esnan Zona, can you take the harlot's payment and use it ultimately to construct a bathroom for the Kohen Gadol? V'lo amarti lo klum. And I didn't say anything. Rabbi Elazar, I didn't respond. Rabbi Elazar, now the reason Rabbi Elazar doesn't respond is because you don't engage in theological discussions with heretics. Generally, again, don't engage in conversations with people who are never really interested in hearing what you have to say. Some people, Rabbi Elazar, when they claim to engage in a conversation, aren't really engaging in a conversation. They're looking to speak. Sometimes people question, they're not interested in the answer, they're just interested in being argumentative. In that case, as we all know, we learn this throughout life, it's more kedai just not to engage and not to answer because the person is not interested. So same thing with these meaning, with these apikarsim. Rabbi Elazar doesn't respond because he understands at the end of the day, generally these conversations don't really have any kind of benefits. I didn't say anything. Amarli, so Yaakov, this guy Yaakov keeps talking. Amarli, kach limdani, this is what I learned. Ki me'esnon zona, boss I see, goes to the pasuk from Micha. Ki me'esnan zona kibatza, va'at esnan zona yashuvu, which literally translates from the esnan, from the payment to the harlot it will be collected, and from the payment of the harlot it will be returned. What does that mean? So when we learned about this guy Yaakov says, so we learned just like the harlot's payment comes from an impure source, so too it can be used for something impure as well. It came from her illicit activities, so it could be used to build the lavatory for the Kohen Gadol. Okay? V'hani ani hadavar aliyit, v'hani ani hadavar. And Rabbi Elazar says, when this guy Yaakov said this to me, I said, good kizak, right? I said, you know what? It's good. I didn't say it, but in my mind, I thought that was a good pshat. And al yidei zeh nitpasti leminos, va'avarti al ma shekasav b'Torah, harchek me'aleha darkecha zum. Rabbi says, this was my mistake. I should have stayed far away from anything heretical. I should have stayed far away from anything that was taught to me by someone who was a heretic. I should have stayed far away from anything, any teaching, we'll say, that comes from impure sources. But I didn't. I enjoyed it. I even felt it might have been correct. And as a result, I was arrested by the Roman authorities. And again, in an effort to ultimately force me to worship Avoda Zara, because I violated the pasuk that says, "Harchek me'alecha darkecha," distance yourself from its ways. What does that refer to? Zuminus. Rabbi say this refers to any type of heretical teachings. V'al tikari v'al pesach beisa, v'al tikar pesach beisa, and do not come close to the entranceway of its house. What does that refer to? Zu arashos. Rabbi say that refers to the government. That ultimately, again, stay as far away from government as one can, because Rashi points out over here, because ultimately, again, all their intention is to extract money or to utilize a person for some purpose, and when that purpose is done, or when the money is done, a person could be in big trouble. Others say, Harchek me'aleha darkecha, distance from yourself its ways, zu minos v'harashos. This refers both to heresy as well as the government. V'al tikra v'al pesach beisa, do not come close to the entranceway of its house. No. This refers ultimately again to a harlot. And what this ultimately teaches us is that not only is it obvious that one can't engage in illicit activity, but one must distance themselves from that illicit activity as well. The kama, how much does one have to distance themselves from a zona? At least 4 amos. At least 4 amos, bless you. Rabbanon, hai me esnan zona my darshibe. What do the Rabbanon do with this phrase, esnan zona? So the Gemara says, Kid Rav Chisda, Dam Rav Chisda, kol zona sheniskeres, l'basof hiso cheres. Rav Chisda will say, teaches us that any zona which hires herself out for illicit activity, at the end will have to buy companionship as well. What does this mean? That she will become so repulsive as a result of her illicit activities that no one will want to be with her. And the only way that she will have the ability to have any kind of companionship will be if she rents the services of someone else. Shnei Amar, because the pasuk over here says, the pasuk from Yechezkel, ubesitech esnan ve'esnan lo nitalach vatihi lehepech upliga de Rabbi Pedas. And Abba said, this argues on Rabbi Pedas. What does Rabbi Pedas say? Rabbi Pedas lo asra Torah ela kreva shal gili arayos bilbad. But Rabbi Pedas holds that one does not have to keep an extra distance from a zona. Rather, the prohibition is just to obviously engage in illicit behavior. But again, I have to abstain from illicit behavior, but there is no obligation to keep greater distance than that. Shnei Amar, ish al kol she'er bisaro lo sikravu lagalos erva. That a man may not come close to anyone who is close to him or relative of him to uncover their nakedness. So the idea over here is that Giloi Erva is what's Asr. Ula, so the Gemara tells a story about this. Ula, Kiava Asimi Beirav, when Ula would come back from yeshiva, this is when he was a younger man, Hava Menashek Lula Achse Abeyadayu. He would kiss his sisters on their hands, Va'amrile Abechadayu. Others said by the top of the chest. Now Rashi points out what this really means is like by the neck. So Rashi actually points out over here that this was often the way that people greeted each other, not just with a kiss on the cheek, but by a kiss on the neck. So Ula came back, and Abba say, these are his sisters. Now it's possible that it's also talking about adult sisters. So what do you see over here? Now a sister is an erva, right? The relationship, yet what? Yet Ula's coming and kissing them. Day Adidei, and Ula's going ahead and contradicting himself, because what did Ula say? Damar Ula, Kreva Ba'alma Asr. Ula holds up say that coming close in any way to any woman who is an erva to you is Asr. Mishum L'cha Amrina L'Nazira Schar L'Kamar L'Sikriv. So both say this is always the catchphrase. L'cha means go away Nazir, go around. The idea is that if we see the Nazir coming close to the vineyard, and let's say the vineyard ultimately again it's his shortcut to get to where he wants to get to, ultimately we tell him better not to take this shortcut. In other words, don't place yourself in harm's way, better to create the distance. So Ula says, Rabosai, that when it comes to matters of illicit activity, it is much better to place a distance, as much of a distance as you can, between yourself and anyone who is in erva to you. So Rabosai says, first of all, this is just an interesting discussion in general about the halachic parameters of kissing female relatives. Obviously, again, with immediate relatives, the issue is not as much, but with extended family, it can become an issue. Again, we're not our topic for today. The interesting part is Ula. What do we do with Ula? Because Ula himself is the one who said, Lo sikr v'lagal los erva means don't even come close to an erva, yet he's kissing his adult sisters, which again is not halachically prohibited, but it's interesting that it seems to be that he's not following his own teachings. So if you look at if you look at Tosas is something very interesting. Tosas says, Upliga didea didei, umasha haya mekel yatzmo, that which Ula was for himself, hainu mishum de alei kishura. Ula felt that he was exceptionally in control of this would not engender any type of illicit feelings within him. But Ula also cautions us that every person has to know themselves and every person has to know their weaknesses in the realm of morality or immorality, and therefore Ula says better to be careful and safe than to take certain licenses and get into trouble. Okay, so the Gemara goes weiter. Lo aluka, so we'll say now the Gemara quotes the pasuk from Mishlei. La aluka shtei banos. Hav. Aluka has two daughters who say, give me. Okay, we'll say, who's Aluka? So if we take a look again at Tosas says, La Aluka, Lafia Pshat, Hainu Gehenim. Aluka is another name for Gehenim. Okay, so Aluka has two daughters. There are two daughters in Gehenim, and they both say, have, give me. My have. Rabbi say, what does it mean, have? Armar Ukva, Kol Shtei Banos Shetzoakos Me Gehenim. There are the voices of the two daughters who cry out from Gehenim. And those two daughters, while they're in this world, almost Ba'olam Hazeh, have, give me. Who are the two daughters, Rabbi say, who call out in this world, give me a man, ninu, minus, v'harashus. Ultimately, again, apikorsus, heresy, and government. Take a look at Rashi. Rashi says minos v'rashus. Rashi says minus tzoakos habat takrovas lavodas kochavim. In this world again, heresy says bring avoda zara, bring some type of carbon to avoda zara. Rashus tzoakos have mamon v'daranos v'arnana umas lamela. So we'll say these two daughters, the daughters, right? One of heresy, one of monarchy. Both give me. The avoda zara wants karbanos. The avoda zara wants me to serve it, and the government wants me to give me its money and taxes. So the Gemara says, others say, others say it is the call, it is the, so both say, so in this world, these two daughters lead many of us astray. But ultimately, again, their place ultimately is in Gehenna. Meaning those who participate in these things, Avodah Zara, and those who utilize government for their own enrichment and to oppress others, ultimately, again, end up calling out from Gehenna. Aramar Ukva. So Ikuda Amri Amrav Chisam Ukva call Gehenna So'akes Va'omer. So also say it is the voice of Gehenna which calls out and says, Haviu li shtei banos shetzoakos va'omros ba'olam hazeh have. Gehenna calls out and says, bring me the two daughters who cry out in this world, give me, which are again the two daughters of Minos and Rashus. So the Gemara quotes over here now from the pasuk from Mishlei, Kol ba'eha lo yeshuvun. We'll say this is actually amazing. Kol ba'eha lo yeshuvun, v'lo yasigu archos chayim. So we'll say literally, all those who come to it, lo yeshuvun, will not return, v'lo yasigu archos chayim, and will not find the pathways to life. So we'll say, take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Actually, not yet. So Gemara says, "V'chimi achar shelo shavu heichan yasigu." So if there's no, so what the pasuk says is, all those who come to it will not do tshuva, and therefore will not yasigu, will not. Literally, yasigu means acquire, understand the pathway of life. So it says the Gemara, "V'chimi achar shelo shavu heichan yasigu." At the end of the day, if they did not do tshuva, so how could they go ahead and acquire the pathway of life? This is what it means. V'im yashuvu lo yasigu archos chayim. If they do tshuva, they will no longer have life. Now I will say, this is referring to Ovdei Avodah Zara. So the Gemara just says something dramatic, that if a person does Avodah Zara, then what? Does tshuva, they will not be given any additional life. What's the pshat? I will say, this is amazing. Look at Rashi. Lo yashuvun, Rashi says, Kala mishtamdim la'avodas kochavim. Anyone who engages in Avodah Zara, achar shenefku b'minos, einam shavim. Vim shavim, if they do tshuva after engaging in Avodah Zara, memarin lamos mitoch tzara ukfias yisram, V'zu gzeras melech aleihem lamos. See, what Rashi, the Gemara is pointing out over here is that sometimes, if a person commits an avera and they do tshuva, and the Rebbeinu Shalom realizes that what? That they're weak, and they may fall prey to the avera again. What does HaKadosh Baruch Hu do? He takes their life. Why? Because better for a person to die in a state of tshuva, even if it means a truncated life, than to potentially fall prey to this very grievous sin again. So that's why the Gemara says, ultimately, again, if this tshuva, im yashuvu lo yasigu archos chayim, that sometimes, again, if tshuva occurs, Rabbi say, the Rebbeinu Shalom does the chesed, ultimately, again, of ending their life there, in order that they cannot fall prey again to the clutches of sin. Now, this is specifically talking about Avoda Zara. Remember, the chalaporish minus mai say that anyone who does tshuva from Avoda Zara immediately dies. We'll say this is wild. There was a woman who once came before Rav Chisda, and she wanted to be a balas tshuva. She wanted tshuva. And so Rav Chisda said, okay, what do you need to do tshuva for? So she said, listen, tell you like this. The least of my sins is asta b'nah hakatan me b'nah hagadol. The least of my sins is that the father of my youngest child is my oldest child. Right? Meaning she committed incest with her oldest child, conceived, and that's the father of her youngest. That's the least of my sins. So obviously this woman's got some problems. He's the least of my sins. What did Rav Chisda say? Tarchu la bizavdasa. So Rav Chisda said, prepare her tachrichim, prepare her shrouds. Rav Chisda was saying that she's going to be a balas tshuva, and obviously again this is a woman who was very, very weak and therefore constantly and consistently fell prey, ultimately again to her wants and to her desires, and therefore Rav Chisda said if she's going to do tshuva, chances are the Rebbeinu Shalom is going to take her life now. Prepare burial shrouds. V'lo meisa, and she did not die. So the fact that she said this was the least of my sins, michlal deminos nami havya ba. So it sounds like she also must have engaged in Avoda Zara as well. In other words, if this is the least of it, that means what's more chomer than arayos? The only thing that's more chomer than arayos is what? Is either shvichos damim or Avoda Zara. So you don't have to assume she murdered someone, but chances are she worshipped Avoda Zara as well. And yet again, she did not die in the immediate aftermath of her tshuva, to which the Gemara says, the case of her is she did not yet do complete tshuva. Even if HaKadosh Baruch Hu ends the life of the penitent, that's so that the person could die in a state of purity, that's only after the person has performed complete tshuva. She did not perform complete tshuva. Mishum hachi lo meisa, and therefore she did not die. Ikeda others say, miminos in me'avera lo, are you telling me that it's only when one does tshuva from Avoda Zara that ultimately it's possible that HaKadosh Baruch Hu may take their life right then and there, so that they can die in the state of purity? Is that only true by Avoda Zara and not by other averos? V'ha hahidasai kamed Rav Chisda v'amar le Rav Chisda zavidula zavdasa. I will say it's the same case. The woman who came before Rav Chisda and she said the kal is the most lenient of my sins that I fathered my youngest child with my oldest child. Prepared the burial shrouds, Umeisa, and she died. Now, I will say it's a different version of the story. In this story, she died. Midika kalasha bekalos, michlal deminos nami havya, umeaverolo. So the Gemara says, so it sounds like over here she must have engaged in Avoda Zara. But again, you're telling me that this concept of immediate death after tshuva only applies by Avoda Zara, but not by other averos. Vatanya, we'll say, here we come to the famous Maisa. So we'll say, just understand what's happening over here. The Gemara put forward a model, and the model is that sometimes when a person is plagued by a particular avera, specifically Avoda Zara, and a person finally summons up the courage to do tshuva, sometimes Rebbeinu Shalom chesed of what? Of removing this person from the world so that they can no longer fall prey to that same Yetzer Hara, and that is a chesed. The Gemara is asking, is it only by Avoda Zara, or is it also by, are you telling me it's only by Avoda Zara and not by other averos? So the Gemara is not going to give the famous Ma'aseh. Tanya, Amra Alav Rabbi Elazar ben Durdaya. What about the servant Rabbi Elazar ben Durdaya? What happened to him? Rabbi Elazar ben Durdaya was an exceptionally moral individual. There was not one zona that he did not frequent. Not one zona One prostitute that he didn't go to. One time he heard that there was a zona overseas. But she charged a very exorbitant price. Natal kis dinarim, he took the bag of money. First of all, you understand that this is such an incredible Baal Taiva. So why is this a Baal Taiva? Because understand, so a lot of times we have taivas. The best way to fight taiva is what? Is how? Right? Count to 100, right? Count to 100. In other words, that sometimes if you just calm down a little bit, right? If you just count to 100 or 1,000 or 10,000, whatever you have to count to, so sometimes the taiva dissipates a little bit, right? This guy is crossing 7 seas, which I will say, obviously, it's a bit hyperbolic, but the idea is like, this was a journey. Like he had to take off from work, right? He had to, this is like so for most people, again, if you have to go through all this trouble, generally, it comes to a certain point where, you know what, either the desire is not there or it's just not worth it. This is about taiva. This is about taiva. This Rabbi Lazar is committed to znus. Mamish again, he's committed to this. So Mamish, he's taking the money, an incredible amount of money. Good morning, Mr. Schoenfeld. You almost got past me that time. So the Gemara this time, he takes the money, he does the travel, and what happens? So the Gemara says, so finally he meets this zona, Bishas Hergil Dover, and when the moment that they're about to sin, Heficha, she exhaled, Rashi says, Amra, Kishim Shaf. The same way the breath that came out of my mouth can never go back. Kach Elazar ben Dordaya in Mekablin Osa b'tshuva. So to Elazar ben Dordaya is not going to do tshuva. Now, Bosai, Maral and Chidushei Haggadah points out, she didn't say this, right? She's not a mashgiach, she's a zona, right? So I'm saying at the end of the day, she's not giving him musar. The idea is, I will say, all of us have that internal mashgiach, right? All of us have that internal voice that when we are about to do something that we know deep down is really not correct and is quite spiritually severe, there's that voice that says, if you do this, you are forever changed. If you do this, life will be forever different. That voice speaks to Elazar ben Dordaya. He projects it onto the zona. He hears it when the zona exhales. He hears in her breath that message that there are certain things that once they are done cannot be undone. When you exhale, you can't get that breath back. He understands that again, he's lived the life of immorality. But perhaps this is the most profound act of immorality that he's about to commit. And I will say, not just because an act of immorality is an act of immorality, but the amount of effort and resources that he put into this act shows that his life is all about immorality. See, I will say, sometimes we all have weaknesses and we all commit averos, but the hope is those averos don't define me. What defines me are my good qualities. What defines me are my accomplishments. Yes, I sin because I'm a human being and I make mistakes. That's the Zoe Darko Shol. It's not what defines me. The problem over here is Rabbi Elazar ben Dordaya understood that now it's not just the pshat that he is a weakness for immorality, he is immorality. It's him. Meaning being mizan is not something he does, it's something he is. V'haraya, he left his home, he left his job, he has incredible amounts of money, incredible amounts of time invested in this. Why? It's not just a recreational pursuit, it's become his life pursuit, and he realizes that now he's at the crossroads. If he engages in this act of immorality, then forever this is his identity. He's about to cross over the point of no return. So what happens? He leaves her. He doesn't engage in the act of immorality. Halach v'yasha bein shnei harim ugvos. He goes and he sits in between mountains and valleys. Amar harim ugvos bikshal rachmim. Mountains and valleys, daven on my behalf. Intercede on my behalf to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Allow me to do tshuva. Amar lo achanu mevakshim alecha levakish alatzmeinu. Essentially, the mountains and valleys say, listen, Elazar, we've got our own problems. We can't daven for you. We have to daven for ourselves. Shnei amar ki harim yamushu v'agvos timotena. Amar shmai v'aretz bikshal rachmim. Heaven and earth, daven on my behalf, intercede on my behalf. Amru, I'm sorry, Elazar, we've got our own problems. In other words, every part of nature is saying, Elazar, we need to take care of ourselves, we can't take care of you. sun and moon, supplicate on my behalf. Amru lo, achanu v'vakshim alecha levakesh al atzmeinu. Before we daven for you, we have to daven for ourselves. Shneimar, v'charfa levano bosha chama. Amr kochav mazos biksha rachamim. Amru lo, achanu v'vakshim alecha levakesh al atzmeinu. Moon and stars. Or I should say, stars and constellations, daven on my behalf. And they say, I'm sorry, before we daven for you, we have daven for ourselves. Finally, he will say, what does he realize? The most profound words and the most life-changing words for all of us. Ein hadavar taloi ela bi. I realize that the matter is dependent on me. So I will say, all of us have that Elazar ben Dordaya moment. Because in life, we like to go ahead and outsource our success to others. Right? This one needs to do this. You know why I haven't accomplished what I want to accomplish? Because this one didn't do this. My mother didn't love me enough. My second grade teacher didn't give me enough cookies. You know, my boss isn't nice enough. My coworkers aren't supportive enough. And again, there's 1,000,001 different reasons why we don't accomplish the things we don't accomplish. And by the way, some of them might be legitimate reasons. But at the end of the day, you have to live life with the mantra, Ein hadavar taloi ela bi. The buck of my life stops with me. My success is up to me, obviously with HaKadosh Baruch Hu as well. But the idea is I can't outsource my success. I can't outsource any aspect of my life to others. I have to own it. I have to control it. I have to fix it. Elazar ben Dordaya tries to get everyone else to do tshuva, to help him change. And then he realizes, it's the profound yet simple words, Ein hadavar taloi ela bi. This is totally dependent on me. So what happens? Hiniach Rosha ben Birkov, he placed his head between his knees. He begins crying until literally his soul left his body. So we'll say this is amazing. A heavenly voice came out and said, Rabbi Elazar ben Dordaya mezuman l'chaye olam haba. Elazar ben Dordaya is invited to spend eternity in olam haba. We'll say, in other words, he did tshuva and he died in a state of tshuva. So we'll say the point over here, the Gemara says, now why are you bringing this whole story? Because here's an example of a man who wasn't steeped in idolatry, but rather, again, it was immorality. Yet we see what happened right after he did tshuva. What happened? He died. So you see that there's this concept that HaKadosh Baruch Hu sometimes can take someone's life after they do tshuva for an ongoing, consistent avera, even if it's not Avoda Zara. Hasam nami kevan da'avik beituva kaminos tamya. But this is interesting. Since he was so embedded in this avera of immorality, it became like his idolatry. See, I will say, idolatry is you pledge your allegiance to an alien theological system. Sometimes a person becomes so enmeshed and so mired in their taivas that their taivas become their avodah zara. My desires become my idolatry. My desires become my theology. So for Elazar ben Dordaya, he wasn't over the avodah zara. It wasn't an avodah zara of an idol. It was the avodah zara of lust. It was the avodah of desire. It was the avodah zara of physical wants that he just gave into and caved into every single time. See, he wasn't over the avodah zara, and once he did tshuva, HaKadosh Baruch Hu took him. Bacha Rebbe. But there's an amazing postscript to this story. Rebbe cried, Va'amar, Yesh kan alam b'kama shanim. There are some people who acquire their world in a number of years, V'yesh kan alam b'sha achas. And some people acquire olam haba in a moment. So we'll say some people spend a lifetime acquiring olam haba. Some people, like Elazar ben Dordaya, acquire olam haba in a moment. V'amar Rebbe, lo dayin le'balei tshuva shemakavlin osan. Rebbe said, furthermore, it's not just that HaKadosh Baruch Hu accepts about tshuva, rather Ella shekorin osa Rebbe. Isn't this amazing? The Bas Kol doesn't come out and say Elazar ben Dordaya mezumah. What does it say? Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar ben Dordaya. But say not only was he accepted as about tshuva, but ultimately again he was held in the highest esteem by the Beis Din Shlamala. He was held in the highest esteem ultimately again as Rabbi Elazar ben Dordaya. But say so much to speak about that story. And so many, there's the Ben Yoyada brings down. He says something. I'll just say this very quickly. He says very beautifully. He says that position of placing his head between his knees. What position is that? Right, it's the fetal position. So the Ben Yoyada says that Rabbi Elazar ben Dordaya wanted more than anything was the ability to start over. The ability to start over. And here's the tragedy. The tragedy is he thought he couldn't start over. That's why he died as a result of his cries. What he didn't realize, and the real tragedy of the story is, he could have started over. He could have started, we'll say. There's always the great gift we have is you can start over as there's no limit. You can start over as many times as you want. You can start over every day. You can start over multiple times in each day. He assumed that if only I could start again. And meanwhile, we say, Elazar ben Duda, you could have started again, but you didn't understand that, you didn't realize that, but you did die in a state of tshuva. In hadavar tali elabi. Rabbi Chanina, Rabbi Yonasan, have a kazli baruch. Let's listen to this. Rabbi Chanina, Rabbi Yonasan, we're walking on the way. So they came to two paths. These Gemaras are like, they came to a fork in the road, two paths. Listen to this. Chad, Fatzia Pischa Davodas Kochavim. The Chad Fatzia Pischa de Zonos. So one path went by an idolatrous temple. One path went by a brothel, a house of Zonos. So we'll say, so the shaila is, which path do you take? This is not a metaphor, by the way. This is mamish, like they literally, I mean, it is a metaphor. We'll say, it absolutely is a metaphor, meaning it's a metaphor for the fact that the truth is, there is no path in life that is absolutely kadosh v'tahar. Every single path in life has its pitfalls. Every single path in life has its spiritual dangers. The shaila is, how do you choose the least of the dangers? So the shaila over here is, which Amar lechad lechavre, nezla pischa davodas kochavim. Let's take the path of idolatry. In other words, let me clarify that. Let's take the path that passes by the Avoda Zara place. And what happens? Amar days Rabbi say, dinochis yitzrei. Because after all, as we learn Rabbi say in Sanhedrin, Anshei Knesset Gdola davened that Yitzhar should be blunted. So meaning we have a better chance of not being lured into Avoda Zara. We pass by the base Zonos, the brothel, that Yitzhar is still very much alive. We run the risk of being pulled in there. And I just want to point something out to you. Do you understand who we're talking about over here? Right? We're talking about Rabbi Chanina and Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Chanina and Rabbi Yochanan are nervous about walking by a brothel, lest they be enticed to sin. So the true mark of tzidkus, is recognition of one's spiritual and moral vulnerabilities. Sometimes we think that we are beyond certain temptations. I will say, there is no temptation that we are beyond. Give people the opportunity and we engage in all kinds of stuff. And the greatest strength is to recognize your vulnerabilities. The greatest strength is to recognize that even if you think you would never do something, it's not true. Rabbi Yochanan and Chanina understand we're human beings, we're men also, we're great men, we're tzaddikim, we've spent a lifetime building ourselves up, but we are not impervious to the temptations of life. Therefore, better let's walk by the path of Avodah Zara. That Yitzhar was blunted. Amar le'idach, neizla pescha de bezonos. No, let's go by the path with the brothel. Why? V'nichbiyei liyitzran unekabel igra. Rabbi said, this is amazing. And let's combat our Yitzhara, and we'll get schar. In other words, the other one said, let's take the path that goes by the base Zonos, the brothel, because there it'll be a test for us. And hopefully, again, we'll be able to rein in our Yetzer and get the schar for overcoming our Yetzer. Now understand, don't try this at home, because in general, again, we never put ourselves in situations where we are forced to test our resolve. It is a bad idea. This is a different kind of case, because in this case, again, either way was a difficult choice, and either way there was an isayon that was there. At the end of the second one, and again, it's not identified who's saying what. The second one is saying, listen, either way, we're going to have a problem. Let's go by the base Zonos. Maybe this is our opportunity for spiritual growth by resisting the temptation. So what happens? So they ended up taking the second path, the path of the Zonos. Kimata hasam chazinu lezonos iskanu mikamayu. So what happens? They're passing by the brothel, and all of the Zonos ran inside and closed the door. So Amarle minalachaha. So one said to the other, how did you know? In other words, we'll say the one who suggested that they passed by the path of the Zonos must have had some type of inclination that they would be saved from Avera. How did you know this is going to happen? Amarle, because it says, Mezima tishmar alecha tevuna tinatzgerena, or sorry, tinsra. Tinatz reka. So we'll say, what does this mean? Literally, mizima tishmar alecha, from zima, from immorality, you will be saved, or you will be guarded. Tivuna tinatz reka, your wisdom will guard you. What does this mean? Amalei Rabbanan l'Rava, my mizima. What does that mean, mizima? Ilema Torah. We'll say this is maybe mizima means Torah. Now, how does mizima mean Torah? D'chsev ba zima umetargaminan eight. Both say the Targum on Zima is literally again counsel to sin. Uksiv hifli eitza higdil toshia. So both say we see that Torah itself is called eitza. Ihachi Zima mi boili. If that's the case, it shouldn't have said mi Zima. Should have said Zima. Hachi. This is what it means to say midvar Zima tishmar alecha Torah Tinatzkirena, what it means is, Rabbi say, that you will be saved ultimately again from immorality when you carry the wisdom of Torah with you. So Rabbi say, Torah, we've seen this before in Maseches Brachos, that Torah is the ultimate remedy for the Yetzer Hara. Rabbi saying this is an incredible yisod that sometimes if a person finds themselves with an incredible desire for immorality, the way sometimes, in addition to counting to 100, but the way sometimes to go ahead and blunt that desire, learn something. Torah has the ability to rein in on the fire of immorality, the fire of Yitzhar, the desire for, or I should say, has the ability to rein in lust. Listen to this. These stories are amazing. Rabbi Elazar ben Parta, Rabbi Chanina ben Chadron. Both say now we're going to be talking about the Asar Harugei Malchus. When Rabbi Elazar ben Parta and Rabbi Chanina ben Chadron were arrested by the Romans. My brother Rabbi Elazar ben Parta, Rabbi Chanina ben Chadron. Ashrecha, Chanina ben Chadron. How praiseworthy are you? Why? Shenispasta al chamisha dvarim. So you are ultimately So listen to this. So I skipped a line. Sorry. So. Yeah, good. So Amalei Rabbi Elazar ben Parta Rabbi Chanina ben Chadron. Rabbi Elazar ben Parta Rabbi Chanina ben Chadron. Ashrecha shenispasta al davar echad. You are so right. You are praiseworthy. Are you that you are arrested for one thing? Oili shenistapasti al chamisha dvarim. Woe to me that I was arrested for 5 things. We'll see exactly what that means. Amalei Rabbi Chanina Ashrecha shenispasta al chamisha dvarim va'atanitzal. So Rabbi Chanina said, no, praiseworthy are you that you were arrested for 5 things, yet you are going to be saved. Oili, Rabbi Chanina ben Chadron says, woe to me, shenispasti al davar echad ve'eini nitzal. That what? I was arrested for one thing, and Rabbi Chanina ben Chadron already realized that he was not going to be saved, he was going to die. Sha'ata sakta b'torah b'gemilas chasadim. Rabbi Chanina ben Chadron says to Rabbi Elazar ben Parta, because you engaged in Torah and gemilas chasadim and chesed, va'ani lo asakti ela b'torah. Right? And I only learned Torah, I didn't engage in chesed. The kid Rafuna, Dam Rafuna, kala osik, it's a very profound Gemara. Kala osik, whoever just learns Torah and doesn't engage in chesed, dome kemisha ein lo eloka. Wow. Well, it says someone who learns Torah but doesn't engage in chesed, it's like he doesn't have a God. Shnei Amar, v'yomim rabim liYisrael lo elokei emes. Ma'ila lo elokei emes. Shekala osik b'Torah bilvad dome kemisha ein lo eloka. That ultimately, again, I will say, the Elokim of MS is the God ultimately of Chesed. So therefore, again, if a person learns Torah but doesn't serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, doesn't do Chesed, it's as if he doesn't have a God. Gemilas Chasadim lo asak. Is that true that he didn't engage in Gemilas Chasadim? But yet, Vatanya, Belazar ben Yaakov Omer, Lo Yitin Adama Osav la'arniki shal tzedakah ele imtein mamuna alav tam tchachim Rabbi Chanina ben Chadron. So we'll say, listen to this. So Rabbi Chanina ben Chadron will say, saying to Rabbi Elazar ben Parta, you're going to survive because you learned Torah and you did Chesed. I learned Torah, but I didn't do Chesed. Is that true that Rabbi Chanina ben Chadron didn't do Chesed? Yet Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says that Rabbi says you shouldn't contribute to a tzedakah fund unless it's administered by a Talmid Chacham like Rabbi Chadron. So Rabbi says, so what do you see from here? He says Rabbi Chanina ben Chadron is associated with the ultimate guy by tzedakah, to which the Gemara says, Hey menuhu dahava mehemin. All it's saying is that a person like Rabbi Chanina ben Chadron was trustworthy to administer the fund. It doesn't say that what? It doesn't say that. It doesn't say that he did it. It doesn't say ultimately again that he performed, that he administered a tzedakah fund, or that for that matter that he engaged in gemilas chasadim. Vatanya, but he learned Amar lo maos Amar lo maos shal purim nischafuli b'maos shal tzedakah. V'chilaktim la'aniyim. So we'll say, listen to this. Yet Rabbi Chanina ben Chadron said that I had Purim money that got mixed up with other tzedakah money, and I gave it all to aniyim. So we'll say there's a halacha that says that money collected for Purim has to go towards Purim and can't be given for other purposes. So we'll say Rabbi Chanina ben Chadron was saying one time my tzedakah money got mixed up, and essentially again I gave extra tzedakah to make sure that both they had for Purim as well as for general needs. So the Gemara says, listen to how profound this is. Rabbi Chanina ben Chadron did chesed, but he didn't do enough chesed. For someone of his standing, he should have performed more acts of chesed. So we'll say this, the power of chesed. Torah by itself is not enough. Rabbi Chanina ben Chadron says, Rabbi Elazar ben Parta, you're going to be saved because you have Torah and chesed. I have a lot of Torah, but don't have chesed. So what happens? Asiyul Rabbi Elazar ben Parta. So we'll see, now we go into the story. The Romans brought Rabbi Elazar ben Parta before them. Amru, my time atonis. Rabbi Elazar ben Parta, why did you teach Torah? Umay Tama Ganafta, and why were you a thief? So they accused him of two things. They accused him of being a thief and teaching Torah. So also listen to this statement. Amrlei, is Seifa lo Sifra, vi Sifra lo Seifa. If I held the sword, then I didn't hold the Sefer. And if I held the Sefer, then I didn't hold the sword. In other words, Rabbi Elazar ben Harta is saying, you're accusing me of two mutually exclusive things. If I was a teacher of Torah, then I spend my days in the Beis Medrash. If I was a thief, then I spent my days thieving. I can't do both. Umidahal hanami lesa, which shows you that the charges are false. In other words, one of these charges are false, and if one of these charges are false, the person who's making the accusation is obviously a liar as well. Fine, that one's dismissed. Umay Taira Kamalacha Rebbe. So if you didn't teach Torah, why do they call you Rebbe? So he responds, Rabban Shaltar Simani. I'm a Rebbe of the weavers. Of a weaver, or I'm a good weaver, so I know how to weave. So they call me the Rebbe of the weavers. Really? So the Gemara says, Aisule Treki Buri. They brought him 2 spools of thread. Said, go ahead, let's see what you can do. Amrule, Haid Shasya, Haid Avra. Which one is the warp and which one is the wolf? So tell me which one is which. In other words, we'll say, how do you arrange it on the loom? Thank you. It's Rachesh Leini. So obviously, Rabbi Elazar ben Harta has no idea because he's not a weaver. So a miracle occurred. Asya ziburta osivi al deshasya. So we'll say a female bee came and rested on the warp. Va'asai zibura v'yasav al da'avra. And a male bee came and rested on the wolf. So we'll say the wolf is thicker than the warp. So he was able to see the male bee, which was associated with the wolf, and the female with the warp. So that's how he was able to tell. How he was able to tell the difference in the gender of the bees, I'm not sure. But okay, whatever it is, that's a kasha. Amr lahu, haid the shasya v'haid the arva. And he says, oh, this is the warp and this is the wolf. Why didn't you show up at the Be'avidan? Well, Be'avidan was the house of Avoda Zara. Why did you not show up at the house of Avoda Zara? Amr lahu zakin hayisi, I'm an old man. Umisyari ashani shema termasuni. And I'm afraid maybe they'll trample me. Braglechem with their feet. Amru v'ada inna kama sabi esramos. So they said, Roman said to him, how many old people have been trampled? No one's ever been trampled at Beis Avidan. So what do you know word about? That day is Rachishnisahu Yoma Irmas Chad Saba. Ultimately, again, what happened? That day, someone was trampled. That day, an old man was trampled at Beis Avidan, and therefore, ultimately, again, his claim stood up. So we'll have to stop over here for today. We'll pick up in the middle of Rabbi Elazar ben Parta's interrogation in Meretz Hashem tomorrow.